Okay, so my name is Larissa, and today I'd like to present the procedural city environment that I've built for my game that I'm still working on. Um, but the environment is already complete pretty much, so I'd like to talk about my design process, design decisions and thought process, more so than any technical details. There will be a bit of technical details, but I can't go into this too deeply, so this is what it looks like, just for reference. Uh, the city is also complete with interiors in every building, at every floor, and interactive props. There are only no NPCs for now. The NPCs are still in the works, so I will only talk about the environment. So first of all, the biggest problem with generating a city is that real cities are incredibly complex. They are built by millions of people over hundreds or even thousands of years. So to represent this incredible variety and complexity by an algorithm, it's a pretty much impossible task. This is why we have to make some compromises and cut some corners to actually achieve it. That's why also my talk is called One of the Many Ways to Create a Procedural City, because there is no way to create a perfectly lifelike procedural city, but there can be many ways to create less lifelike procedural cities. And I'm just showing one of them. I'm not claiming that this is the correct way or the only way. So this is just what I do. So first of all, I'd like to talk about the requirements I had for this city, which defined the process, the way I had to develop it. So first of all, I wanted to make a city that would be an environment for the game that I could drive through for a long time, because currently there are some games that take place in cities, but you can't really drive through them for very long because they're not that large. And I wanted to be able to drive for hours with no repetition of scenery. So it had to be procedural. The next requirement would be once I implemented the driving, I would like to also get off at any point and enter whatever building is there, wherever I happen to be driving. And once I enter the building, I of course want to take the elevator and go to every floor and enjoy the scenery and great views from up there. And if I have interiors at every floor, they have to be sufficiently varied. I can't just spawn the same interior everywhere. So these are the main requirements that I had. And also that it would all run in VR. But that's optional. So yeah, but I never had the requirement to make a lifelike city or a city that resembles any real life city. I was just building a city, and this is what I came up with. So first of all, I had to decide on the size of the city. I had my options were to make a small-ish city where I could manually determine the layout, but then I would not be able to drive for hours. It would be too small. So my next option would be a large but finite city. Here, I of course couldn't determine the layout manually anymore because it would be too large. So I had to do some procedural layout. And the third option would be an infinite city that just stitches itself together endlessly. But I decided that that would be an unnecessary complication and went with variant number 2. My city currently has about 100,000 buildings for each seat, and it's 20 by 20 kilometers in size. But the size is arbitrary. I can define it as anything, and the only limitation is the floating point artifacts. But this 20 by 20 kilometers works well. And next I had to decide on the style of the city. I wanted my city to be modern or futuristic. Like it's not a fantasy game, so it had to be something between that. So my options were either to go with a quaint and traditional European city design, which I love, but there are some problems with it because it requires a lot of very specialized assets, and it's hard to escape resemblance to any real cities. And if I mishmash assets from different real life cities, they probably wouldn't go together very well. So my second option, and the one I chose, was the modern metropolitan glass and steel design from like global cities. Some people find it soulless, but I personally kind of like it. The aesthetic, the clean shapes, the straight lines, and it's very easy to generate, which is another bonus. So, of course, I could also go with futuristic or cyberpunk design, but I decided that I want something modern-ish. It's a little bit futuristic, but not very far into the future. And then I had to decide the layout for my procedural space filling thing, because the most obvious choice would be to just have it on a grid, on a regular orthogonal grid like this, where every block or every building occupies a certain number of cells. But I personally don't like grids that much because, first of all, the grid cell will be noticeable after a while. You will see that all the buildings are kind of the same size or the same like number of cells. And another problem with the grid layouts is these very long streets that you can potentially get, which create these vistas that go far into the distance, and you kind of see that there's nothing really there at the end of it because it's just one straight line with nothing terminating it. That is something I wanted to avoid for my streets. So the next option for the layout would be something Voronoi-like, some irregular grid. Not necessarily this one, it's just an example, but something irregular. And this would work amazingly well. I would love to try that, but there was one big complication with this type of grid, is that, and it would work really well with a traditional European style city, of course. But the biggest complication is that I wanted to generate interiors in every building. And it's really hard to generate interiors when your buildings have these random shapes. So I decided to make it simple for myself and go with rectangles. I was looking at a stock chart the other day, and I was like, oh my god, this would make an amazing city layout. Maybe not when it's like sorted like this, where all the big cells are on one side, the smaller cells are on the other side. But it just seemed like, first of all, it's all rectangles, which makes it very easy to generate. And second of all, there are no vistas apart from the larger sections. But otherwise, all the streets are terminated, and I can terminate them pretty much whenever I want. So I just took the same exact algorithm used to generate this kind of layout, which is called squarified tree map, and I used it to generate my city's layout. And the best part about it is that because it's all rectangles, they can be applied recursively, and I can generate not just the blocks, I can subdivide those rectangular blocks into buildings, and I can use the same algorithm to subdivide the interiors into sections, which is exactly what I do. All the interiors are also generated in the same way as the blocks and the buildings. So this is what it looks like, this layout from the up top. And basically, the city is a kind of a self-replicating fractal when you really get down to it. But next, since I've determined the size and the layout, I knew what I wanted to generate, I had to decide how I'm going to generate it. Because of the size of the city and the level of detail, because I wanted to have not only the interiors, but also interactive props inside the interiors, I knew I had to do it all at runtime. I couldn't pre-bake or pre-compute anything because that would not only take a lot of data to store, a lot of bandwidth to load. It was just unnecessary. So I decided that I will be generating everything at runtime in more and more detail the closer it is to the player, basically. So I've implemented this building block object, which pretty much all of the objects in my city inherit from. This is the base class for everything, which is very simple. It creates a low detail model when it spawns. And as the player, it has a range setting, and as the player comes into this range, it transitions into a high detail model and spawns its children. And each child is also an instance of this same class. For example, if this is a building, then the low detail model will be the box of the building with just a shader imitating the windows. There's like no geometry there, just a shader far in the distance. And the high detail model that it creates once the player comes into range is like walls and windows. And then it spawns its children, which for a building would be the floors of the building. And then each floor spawns a low detail model, which is just floors and ceilings and some ghost furniture. I have some imposters for like ghosts of the future furniture inside. And the high detail model will be the actual interior. So as the player moves through the city, it looks static. The city looks static, but it's actually very dynamic because this is happening like every inch you move. This is happening. Some models are changing their levels of detail. Some models are spawning and despawning. And for this, I also had to implement some separation between the data and its representation in the world. Because this model where I only spawn what's near the player, it limits me because I don't have any way to find out any information about anything that's located outside of this detailed zone. And I want to do that because I want to have a game in this environment. I want to send a player on a quest to the other side of the city. So I implemented a global topology object here on the left, which generates all the geometric data for everything from a single seed that you specify when you start the game. And this topology, it doesn't store any data. It has some caches, but not much. It doesn't store anything. Whenever an object in the game world requests some data from the topology, it generates that data on the fly. It doesn't store it. And then there's the representation on the right, the objects that actually request data from the topology class. These are, all the objects on the right are instances of this building block that I specified earlier. So they spawn their children and children's children, and all of them know where to spawn and what to spawn because they request the data from the global topology. Now, of course, there are some optimizations here in place because I do want to run the project in VR, which limits my time for each frame very much. So I have limits on how many objects can spawn in every frame. I also have some other optimizations that I can't really get into right now, but this kind of works. So now that I've spawned the interiors, I also want to spawn interactive props inside the interiors, like these bottles in a bar, or this beautiful book that I totally didn't plan to have, but it's procedural. The title is also procedural. So the problem with the props is that they are not static. They can be picked up, they can be thrown, destroyed, or used for some quest. Again, I don't have quests yet, but I will. So what I did for this is just add another layer to my data that stores the modifications. I think this is a pretty standard solution. Stores the modifications to all the interactive items, and although each item also spawns from the data received from global topology, it first requests the modification data, and if it's been modified, then it doesn't spawn anymore, and it spawns instead in its modified position, or not at all if it has been destroyed. But if it hasn't been modified, it just generates a location. And since everything is generated from a seed, like I said, the location will always be the same. So if you enter the same, this creates a perfect illusion of persistence. So if you enter a space, you see some props there, you mess with them, you make a huge mess, throw everything around, you leave that area, you return, and the mess will still be there. And the last part is the actual driving. I don't have any manual driving in my city right now, but I do have some self-driving cars, which the player can actually get into and take a ride. And that was actually a big challenge for a procedural environment, is how do I handle pathfinding? Because the city is large. This is the map of the city, like very approximate, of course, no buildings. But this, for example, here, I would say the detailed area is like maybe a small circle around the player. There, the red thing is the player, and maybe a small circle is the actual detailed area where I know things. But everything else, it's just very low detail. I cannot pathfind from one end of the city to the other because I don't know what's between those points. And loading all that data and calculating like a default A* path through it would take a very long time. So my solution for now is to have a partial pathfinder that only pathfinds through whatever is loaded currently, and then make some assumptions for what's coming next. And it, of course, updates that path as more objects load. This works pretty well, but not perfectly yet, so I'm still looking to improve this. Sometimes the cars do get lost, but it's not a big deal for now. And this is how I fulfill all my requirements. I have a city where you can drive for hours. I have all the interiors at every floor. Yeah, I can't go into detail right now for the exact stuff because the interiors were a huge part of this project, and they're on talk. Maybe I'll do it another time. But I have interiors, I have great views, and I do have variety in the interiors. Because I'm not spawning the interiors from a template. I don't have any templates for the interiors. I place every object procedurally within those subdivisions that I showed earlier. And with a variety of rules, I can create a variety of interiors. And hang on. Yeah, and this is, my project is called Vantra City. If you're curious to find out more detail, I have a YouTube channel where I talk a lot about how I make it. And there's a demo right now that you can play, although be mindful of the minimum specs because it may not run on like a regular laptop. You might need a gaming laptop or something. But it's playable both on flat screen and VR. That's it, thank you.
Thank you, Larissa. I can imagine that there are quite a lot of questions actually. So,
hi, great talk. So a couple of questions. Are you using modular kits for everything, or is there any procedural geometry? And then also tangentially, totally understandable why you'd go for squarified tree maps to avoid all the corner issues and edge cases, but do you have plans for doing more types of organic shapes and integrating that for more variety?
Thank you for the question. First of all, wait, it was a bit too long. What was the first part?
Oh, just the first one is everything made out of modular kits?
Oh yeah, the modular. So yeah, again, I couldn't get into the geometry, but I because I'm generating everything at runtime, I'm very limited to what I can create geometry-wise. So I try to use very simple algorithms for geometry. Like wherever I can place a static prop, I do that. And if wherever I cannot place a static prop, I do have modules, but I usually don't generate any geometry like vertex by vertex. I only use instancing to place things where they should be. And the second question
would be about, do you have any
oh,
plans
the
to...
irregular shapes.
Yes.
Yeah. I do really want to make buildings of other shapes. Probably still going to be limited, like maybe cylindrical or just rounded corners, something like that. But it's just not a priority right now. I want to focus on finishing the gameplay and the NPCs. So for now, they just remain rectangular.
Thank you for the talk. That's extremely impressive work. I'm curious, how do you handle the transition from low res buildings to high res buildings? So they like, do they like they match like that? I think that find that a real challenge with us. So.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the transitions in that object, they're actually custom written for every single instance. Like for buildings, for example, I use a lot of tricks to synchronize the low detail and the high detail look because they are completely different objects. It's not a case of like one modular building that just has the same number of modules but different, maybe different model resolution or something. I spawn completely different things. Like for a low detail model building, I spawn just a box with like your standard number of vertices, and I imitate the walls and the windows with a shader, which is pretty complex. I wrote a custom shader for this. And I also generate the window colors at runtime as a texture. And then when the transition happens, I have some smooth transitions there. I actually create the geometry. And it just took a lot of manual fine tuning to make them kind of match, although they still don't match perfectly. And if you look out for it, you can notice these transitions. But I think I got them pretty close.
No more questions? I think you will get a lot of questions during the break, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, there's one more. Okay, so one more question, and then we go to the break.
Hi, and thanks for the talk. My question is like, so all of this is running in Unreal or in a custom engine?
Yeah, I forgot to mention that this is all Unreal Engine 5.
Okay, and so I guess my question is, have you tried using stuff like Nanite for optimization and LOD change, and maybe also like PCG, at least for the external parts of the building?
Yeah, I've considered both, but first of all, Nanite turned out to be unnecessary because my city, like I mentioned before, is all designed to have a lot of straight lines and flat surfaces. So Nanite doesn't really do anything there. It just increases the overhead. I don't have that much complex geometry. I do have some plants, but also not many. So Nanite is just not justified there. And for PCG, I started this project when PCG was still experimental, like very early stages. And I kind of implemented all the same stuff myself already by the time PCG stopped being experimental. So I'm very curious about what Unreal will come up with next in the PCG department. Maybe I will use some of the other tools that they will release. But for now, I just pretty much reinvented the wheel and rewrote everything myself.
Okay, thank you once more.